Humans aren't very good at seeing in the dark. We aren't the only ones either. Because of this, other hungrier animals have adapted to see extremely well in the dark. Creatures who wake after sundown and prowl for those who lie blind in the shadows. Today, I've got some allegedly true and scary stories about terrifying creatures encountered at night. Enjoy. Go to darkstories.org to send me your scary stories so I can narrate them. Check out eeriecast.com to get more of my horror content. Now, let's begin. But first, this episode is sponsored by Exter. You know what's really scary? Losing your wallet, having your identity stolen, carrying around your important cards, cash, and IDs in a flimsy old wallet. What if I told you there's an easy way to remedy these problems and never experience the horror story of a Wendigo finding your wallet in the woods and purchasing an Uber with your credit card? What you need is an Exter wallet. Exter wallets feature a button to easily and safely release up to 12 of your cards, RFID protection to keep your identity and your money away from sketchy strangers, and premium leather that just feels too good to pull out and pay for that caramello. Don't worry, it's got a money clip too, so you can carry those dozens of $1 bills around and still pretend you've got mad stacks. Even better, you can get an Exter wallet with an optional tracker. After installing the Tripolo app and activating your card, this bad boy goes in your wallet, and using the app, you can locate it by making it ring or even showing you where your wallet is on a map. So respect yourself and your belongings. Get an Exter wallet today. Go to exter.com/darkness. Don't let that Wendigo joyride any more Ubers on your dime. That's exter.com/darkness. Link in the description. Thank you, Exter. I'm sure it followed me home. Or did it accompany me outside? From Chant, Recollect. I was not an easy teenager to raise. I wore only black, listened to angry music like Slipknot, Korn, Papa Roach, Pantera, you get the idea. And I had an immeasurable amount of hate for almost everyone, even my family. Naturally, I didn't fit in. And trust me, my high school peers made sure I knew it almost every day. I didn't care much for topics that kept the girls talking. And to be honest, hearing what the boys thought didn't interest me either. I was pretty alone in my little world. My grades were well above average, so the teachers liked me. I'm sure that only added fuel to the fire. Then I met Jason, who was 6 or 7 years older than me. My dad did not approve of our relationship, but he didn't exactly forbid it either. My dad did, however, enroll me into a martial art called Shotokan Karate. I guess he had hoped I'd learn discipline and some self-defense, but that's not really related to the story. Now, Jason had a friend named Kayleen. Kayleen was strange. I imagined her to be what I could be if I didn't eventually learn to make peace with my past and integrate myself into society. I liked her though. She was very knowledgeable in the macabre and dark arts. She used to be rather deep in the pit before finding the faith and actively participating in spiritual warfare against demons and other evil entities. I also liked her because she didn't push my buttons on what I wanted to do with my life, or how I'll eventually turn into a pretty girl, if only I'd wear brighter colors and tied my hair back. The three of us would often hang out during weekends or whenever school wasn't too hectic. I remember one weekend where my dad had gone to be on a panel of judges in a karate tournament. Kayleen and Jason were supposed to come over a bit later that Saturday to just catch up, since we'd have the house to ourselves. About 3 hours before they arrived, I came home and smelled the most horrific thing as soon as I opened my bedroom door. We lived in a 2-story house at the time. My bedroom was above the kitchen and faced southwest, which meant it never got direct sunlight and was always cold. My window was practically level with the fence because there was a very, very steep incline from the yard, like the developers had dug a square crater and built a bunch of houses inside. And we were situated on the border. On that late afternoon, it smelled as if someone had placed spoiled eggs and a carcass on the fire, fur and all, and kept burning it until only bones remained. I searched for anything that might have died under my bed. I also cracked open the attic door to see if maybe a rat had died up there. Nothing, but that stench increased. While I contemplated opening the window, the dankness dissipated. Confused, I looked out the window again to see if the wind had changed direction, only to find that the leaves and grass still bent the same way. It was odd, but I let it go. We had this ritual of going off-road into the wilderness every second Saturday night, building a fire, cooking some food, talking and drinking until the sun came up. Sometimes we'd just build a fire and listen to music via Jason's car, though he'd have to start it every hour or so to charge the battery. We'd take turns contributing things every time. One Saturday I'd provide the meat, the next I'd bring a potato salad. Another Saturday I'd be in charge of garlic bread, plates and cutlery, or snacks or charcoal, etc. We would always rotate, so toward the end of the month we'd invite more people because funds are low, and the bigger the crowd, the less each person has to bring. On this particular Saturday, Jason, Kayleen, and I would chill for a bit before heading out to meet my high school friend Sadie and her boyfriend, Richard, because he was and still is today the nickname version of Richard. After stopping at the liquor store, we headed out to our secret spot. But this time we noticed our fire pit was not the way we'd left it 2 weeks ago. The rocks that had sat around it had changed, and there were ashes that looked fresher than they should be. We exclaimed some expletives and set out re-establishing our domain by fixing the fire pit and rearranging the logs we used as seats. By the time we finished, the sun had set, and Jason had to switch on the lights of his car, pointing towards where the fire should already have been going. It was my turn to collect kindling, so while Jason got his playlist started, I entered the darkness. Like I said, I was a very angry teenager. This meant that I rarely had the emotional range to get a fright or feel legit fear. 95% of the time I'd just get teed off and bruise whomever tried to scare me. I didn't even flinch during horror movie marathons. This is important. I could see the car's beams and my companions as I walked further. Having to rely on my sense of touch, I grabbed any available dead tall grass whilst not tripping over anything. The area was flat, so I wasn't concerned about falling into a ditch or whatever. I walked in a straight line, so I'd know what lay ahead of me when I went back. But all of a sudden, I don't know, the music, their laughter and voices, the crickets and nightlife just died. As if someone had put plugs into my ears without me feeling it. I turned around and behind me was just black. I was confused. If Jason's car had died, I should still be hearing the voices of the people I came here with. But instead, there was nothing. Even the stars had been painted over. I was a little annoyed at this, assuming they were trying to prank me, and the sky had just clouded over without me noticing. I retraced my steps, but somehow I felt like I was going the wrong direction. Then, a few yards away, something took a step. Imagine if an elephant had hooves and walked on 2 legs. That's how big and heavy this thing sounded. I perked my ears and listened closely as it took another step. There was no breeze, but still a wall of mephitis hit my face like a 10-pound hammer to a toy truck. I was dazed. For a millionth of a second, pure white flashed at the back of my eye sockets. It was that same disgusting miasma that I'd smelled from my room earlier. Another step, and the hoof sounded like it was only 21 yards away. I looked in that direction, hoping to see eye shine, or anything that could help me identify what animal this was. We had some pretty big antelope outside of city limits, but that smell, that was the moment when complete and utter terror took over me. My hackles were raised, and my skin crawled all over. I ran in the direction that initially felt wrong, and to my relief, it didn't sound like anything followed me. Finally, it was as if I walked through a veil of fabric, and I saw the light, the car, everyone. Sound had also returned. Now my panic turned into rage because I was so teed off that something could make me feel like a newborn deer being scrutinized by a pack of rabid wolves. Kayleen was the first to notice me as I walked toward the pit to settle the kindling. She asked what was wrong. When I gave her a certain look, she came closer and asked again. I told her what I experienced, and she went a little pale. But then I mentioned what happened earlier in the day, because it was the second time I'd smelt that. I shuddered just remembering it. She went completely white this time, and loudly exclaimed, "That's it! We're leaving right now, everyone screw off, party's over." Richard attempted to protest, but I kicked behind his knee and told him to get in his car and leave. Sadie yelled something at me, but she got in the car and the two of them left. We pretended to load the car, only until they were out of sight. Jason stopped us and asked what was going on. Kayleen mentioned something found me and must have followed us here, but she wanted to stay a little while to try and find out what it was. An uneasy feeling came over me, so I sat in the car. I heard the two of them murmuring, but couldn't discern what they said, or if they'd said it in English. Nonetheless, they suddenly jumped in the car, and we sped off. Jason drove like a lunatic all the way to Kayleen's house, or what I assumed to be Kayleen's house, as I'd never been there. We spent the night there. It felt safe and warm, and I fell asleep in record time. My insomnia, and resulting agrysomnia, meant this should have been practically impossible. Agrysomnia is Latin for a sick man's dreams, hallucinations, or nightmares. The next morning, I awoke to them staring at me intently. None of them said anything or ever mentioned this event again, but I'm sure they must have blessed me or something, because I never sensed that thing ever again. To this day, I can't tell if it was because of that night or my sudden increase of homework and assignments, or just the fact that Kayleen seemed to detach from us. But we three eventually fell apart, and we went our separate ways. I couldn't contact them even if I wanted to. I don't know Kayleen's last name, and Jason isn't on social media. It's a little frustrating, but this was over a decade ago. Still, I often wonder, what did they do to me while I slept? How did I fall asleep so easily? And what the heck was that thing? Creature Beneath the Pharmacy. From Claire. I used to work overnight shifts at a pharmacy. It was a large building, located on the outskirts of a city. It operated 24/7. I worked as an assistant to the pharmacist, a lovely woman named Catherine. Aside from her, there were 2 or sometimes 3 people on duty, security officers and a guy who stocked the shelves in the rest of the store. He was only there once or twice a week, though. For the most part, it was very quiet. The only time there was any problem was when a customer would get aggressive if Catherine or I was taking a while to fetch a prescription. This would be handled easily. Security usually hung near the front of the store, as during the night, the pharmacy counter was the only place someone could check out other products, so it would be all too easy to steal something. My encounter takes place on Monday night. The guy who restocked missing products wasn't there, and so I had to take over. Groceries were fine, but the on-the-shelf medicine like ibuprofen and vitamin supplements were in need of refreshing. I remember being down an aisle with a few big boxes, putting products onto shelves, when I heard something weird. There were opaque dividers between every aisle that were very tall, so you couldn't see through to the next. But I heard someone's shoes dragging on the aisle next over. They were moving very slowly. It made me kind of concerned. Listening to them inch across the floor, I stood up. I'm a very short woman, so again, I couldn't see over to the next aisle. Instead, I just walked around, planning to ask the customer if they needed help. As I entered the next aisle, though, I didn't see anyone. I knew for a fact I had heard someone walking around. Somehow they had disappeared in the few seconds it took me to reach the next aisle. If they had started running, I certainly would have heard it. Instead, it was like they just vanished. So I went back to stocking shelves, telling myself that I had imagined it, though I knew for a fact I hadn't. It was a little while later when I heard the same sound again, only this time on the other side of the store. I listened. It was clear as day, someone dragging their feet across the aisle. This time it was accompanied with something else. I could hear whoever it was grabbing bottles and jars off the shelf, slamming them onto the floor. Pills were rattling as the person cleared shelves of their products. I remember shouting at them before running to the end of the aisle and crossing over to theirs. Of course, no one was there. Containers were everywhere, with lots of items spilled onto the ground. But whoever had done it was gone. Somehow, like last time, they had cleared the aisle before I'd gotten there, without making a sound on their exit. This incident attracted the attention of one of the security guards who came running. He asked me what had happened. I didn't really know what to say. I wanted to tell them someone had knocked stuff off the shelves, but at that point I wasn't even sure. I just sort of shrugged, and kindly he helped me pick stuff back up. After that, I was very freaked out. I quit stocking shelves, instead opting to only get a product for a customer if they asked for it. I went back behind the pharmacy counter with Catherine. She could tell I was freaked out, I think, but didn't pry. The shift was soon a little over halfway finished when she left to use the washroom. So I was sitting behind the pharmacy counter, just sort of watching the store. In front of me and to the right, I could see a shelf full of sparkling water, like Perrier and San Pellegrino. I'm not looking at it, but out of the corner of my eye, I see a bottle fall off the shelf. Immediately, I glance over and watch as it hits the ground. It rolls a little before suddenly it gets yanked by an arm from under the shelf. That's right, an arm, a terrible arm. It was humanoid, long, with an elbow, a hand, and 5 fingers, but also really off. It was a pale white and looked sort of dirty, maybe rotted, and it was far too long and skinny, totally disproportionate to that of a normal person. I stood up straight, not sure what to make of it. There's a good few inches of space under each shelf. It wasn't abnormal to lose products beneath them sometimes, but the arm, that was an entirely different story. Even more terrifying was the thought of the creature it belonged to. I immediately called the security guard using the phone on the desk. The same guy from before came up, asking me what was wrong. I knew I had to choose my words carefully so I didn't come off as crazy. So I told him there was some kind of animal underneath the shelf. I watched, holding my breath, as he removed a flashlight from his belt and got on the ground. He shined the light underneath it, scanning back and forth for a few seconds. Then he stood up, informing me there wasn't anything there. He left, letting me know that it might have run off to somewhere else in the store, and telling me to call again if I see it. I was really dumbfounded as he walked away. Whatever thing had produced that arm must have been massive. There should have been no way for it to exist underneath the shelves at all, let alone crawl away. Now rather terrified, I go back to my desk and begin to wait the shift out. I just wanted to get the heck out of there. Sure enough, Catherine came back. She wore a troubled look that was much different to her usual self. I remember asking her what was wrong. She paused, taking a breath, before telling me she had heard something really strange. She was sitting on the toilet when she began to hear thumping from beneath her. It sounded like there was a large animal below the floor, violently crashing about as she was in the bathroom. She even said she would hear it shriek from time to time, as if in great pain. I held my breath, only reacting to her story mildly. I didn't say anything to her about the thing I'd seen. I didn't want to freak her out. Instead, I just waited. The rest of the night was fine, save for a few items falling off of shelves here and there. After I left the shift without incident, I began to do some digging. First, I checked out the publicly available floor plans. It didn't help out much. Then I sent an email to the owner of the pharmacy, who gave me contact information for the building manager. It took a while for him to respond, but eventually he did. He informed me that the building did have a basement, just like I'd thought. I asked him how deep it was, and he wasn't entirely sure, but suggested it was 8 to 10 feet in the shallowest parts. You're probably wondering where I'm going with this. Well, the floor of the pharmacy is tile, large and heavy slabs of marble. I don't think they were ever secured in place because their weight alone should have been enough. That arm I saw must have belonged to a creature in the basement, and somehow with an absolutely inhuman strength, it must have pushed tiles off the floor from the bottom, shaking various shelves throughout the night. Even worse, I heard footsteps too, which implies that at a few points it had removed itself from the basement entirely, coming up to the surface and into the store. I soon quit after that. I couldn't bear to work in a place where I knew something like that could be lurking. I still think about it from time to time, despite it being almost 5 years ago. But the concept that scares me the most isn't the creature itself, but rather its height. If what the building manager had told me is correct, the basement is 8 feet deep at its shallowest point. Considering how far I'd seen that thing's arm extend out from under the shelf, it must have been at least 9 feet tall, if not more, in order to reach that far from within the basement. Creature in the Woods of Texas, from Anita Sandwich. This story is my uncle's. I remember him telling me about it one day when I visited him. I figured I'd share this here because it's haunted me for my whole life, and I hope it gives you a scare too. I'll tell you the story from my uncle's point of view, just as he told me. I live in the backwoods of southeast Texas, around the Houston area. Where I live, there are mostly country people, so owning guns and hunting is common. I happen to enjoy hunting, so I had a nice shotgun of my own too. One night, I was in the mood to go hunting, so I took off. I remember the night being dark and cold. I was hoping to get a deer for my family to eat. I set off in my truck to drive to my favorite hunting spot, a few miles down the road from my house. When I got there, I got out of my truck and set off into the forest, the cold air biting my skin. Flashlight in one hand and gun strapped to my back, I made my way deep into the forest. I always enjoyed my time alone while hunting, especially that night. The stars shone through the trees overhead. It was a lovely sight. But then the crackling of the leaves under my feet began to get to me, and I started to feel uneasy, a primal sense of being watched. Afraid that I was about to run into a bear, I began to quickly walk back to my truck, already calling it a night. Maybe this wasn't a good idea, I thought. When I made it back to my truck, as if on cue, I heard this screech. It sounded like a woman screaming, like she was dying. That's when I said, screw this, and I swung my truck door open, speeding off down the road. My heart was racing as I drove away. I had no idea what in the world was out there. But then, I saw it. Something in the middle of the road ahead. I slowed my truck so as to not hit whatever it was. It was huge, hunched over, facing away from me. Not thinking, I honked my horn, and the thing whipped its head around to look at me. Then it turned its whole body to face me in my truck. In the headlights, I saw it clearly. Though hunched, it was standing at about 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and the head of a buck. It had sharp yet crooked teeth, stained with blood in places and yellow in others. I swear I could smell the creature from in my truck. It reeked of rotten flesh, the scent of death. I locked eyes with it, pure black eyes that bore into mine. We sat like that until it let out a loud scream. I saw all of its teeth then, and my heart dropped. I floored it, driving past it, my heart pounding all the way home. When I got home, I told my wife what I saw, but she did not believe my story. Now I tell this story to my nieces and nephews to scare them, but I swear with everything in my soul, this is true. Something in the Backyard, from Ray. During the summer or over the weekends, my family and I would camp in our backyard. My dad would bring an extension cord outside and set up a TV and DVD player for us to watch movies until it was time to go to bed. My mom would stay inside, and sometimes my dad would too. My brothers were usually the ones who wanted to camp outside, so I would stay with them. This was one such night where we all decided to camp outside. Once it got dark, my dad started a bonfire and we made s'mores and roasted hot dogs on the fire and joked around. We would scare each other by telling scary stories, only to laugh about it after. On this night, though, I thought it would be funny to scare my brothers. At a certain point in the night, I told them that I had to go to the bathroom, so I exited the campsite and pretended to walk into the house. There's a porch which has a sliding door to enter the house, and the door is loud, so I couldn't actually go inside, otherwise they would have heard the door open and close 2 times, and my plan wouldn't have worked. So after I pretended to go inside, I snuck behind the tent and waited a while before I even thought of a way to scare them. Then I hit the tent a few times and walked back and forth behind the tent. I could hear them become dead silent with only a few exchanged whispers towards each other. After that, I heard a rustling sound in the woods behind the fence, so I turned to look where the sound was coming from, and my heart just sank. There was a tall figure standing next to a tree. It was slightly hunched over, looking directly at me. I stepped back a few times, and I heard a faint growling noise coming from it. I could hear my brothers panicking, and I was standing as still as I could. It backed up and turned around to walk back into the woods. After I made sure I couldn't hear it or see it, I pretended to come back out of the house and tried not to look as scared as I was when I entered the tent. My brothers looked at me in terror and asked me if I was outside that whole time. I said no, because I wanted to continue the prank on them. But I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and surprisingly my brothers did. I haven't told them about what I saw, and I don't plan on ever telling them. The Growl, from TASD 1073. I live in Delta Junction, Alaska. This happened in 2013 in November. I was trying to get a ride home from a girlfriend's house who lived on Tanana Loop Extension. I lived about 3 miles away off the Richardson Highway from her place, on my boyfriend's dad's salvage yard. At the time, my girlfriend and her boyfriend were fighting, so I ended up walking home. It was a very unusual warm November night for central Alaska, but not totally unheard of due to the strong winds Delta Junction is notorious for. Sometimes these winds are so warm coming from the south that they have been known to literally melt snow overnight. It was about 10 p.m., and I couldn't stay there, so I began to walk home. As I got about a couple of blocks away from her place, I could hear this god-awful screaming. It literally sounded like a small child or toddler being, I don't know, I can't even describe to you how ear-piercing and horrifying the noise was. I was petrified, freezing into place for like a minute or 2. Debating if I should head back to her place or just keep booking at home, I decided to cross the road. There are no sidewalks in Delta Junction. I wanted to get away from this gut-wrenching screaming, which I chalked up to be the sound of some animal, most likely a lynx. They can make the most terrifying noises or screams when calling for a mate, but I never heard it quite like that since that night. As I crossed the road and planned on walking on this side of the street the rest of the way, all of a sudden I heard this sharp, loud growl, like something that would come from a cougar or a big cat. I honestly don't know what it was. Even more petrifying, it sounded like it was right at my left ankle. That close. I froze and I could hear nothing but my heartbeat in my ears at that point. Now this is where it gets even creepier. I could not see, smell, or even hear this thing, except for the nasty, terrifying growl that snapped at me when I tried walking on that side of the street. By that point in my journey, it was pointless for me to turn around and go back from where I started, so I had to keep walking in the smack dab middle of the road the whole way home. Every time I tried walking on the side, this thing would snap and growl at me at least 3 more times on my way home. It was cloudy that night, so the only light I had was very minimal, and there wasn't much snow. Luckily, I knew this journey by heart, as I'd traveled it so many times. That was the most scared I've ever been in my life. I just kept on walking, briskly, filled with horror, and praying relentlessly in my head. The thing that really got me was what kind of creature would follow someone all the way to their destination, as this one did to me. I'm not kidding you. It kept up with me all the way to my driveway, which was a mile long, before I finally ran to my cabin. Once the outside light was in my view, I collapsed inside my big heavy cabin door and was gasping for air. I realized I was holding my breath practically the entire walk home, in total and complete shock. I wasn't ripped or mauled to death by whatever that creature was that actually followed me all the way to my cabin. I can't help shake the feeling that every time it let out that terrifying sharp growl, which seemed to be right at my ankle each time it did, it was really saying, "Get out of here. Go home." Well, what sort of critter would do such a thing? And like I said, I could absolutely not see, smell, or hear it in the snow outside of just that heart-stopping sharp growl. It took me 2 solid years to step foot into the dark after that night, and I haven't been in woods or open roads on foot ever since. If anyone can tell me what kind of creature would stalk a person in this manner, I would love to hear it.